Hello my dear friends, how's it going? Welcome. I'm Arith and today I'm here to once again speak of some common misconceptions and also some truths, albeit exaggerated, concerning the Nordic societies of the late Iron Age and early Middle Ages, with a special focus on the so-called Viking Age. This being part of a previous video where I have answered the most frequently asked questions of last year by my patrons concerning these themes, and since this year there's already been some very interesting questions and doubts concerning the Vikings, let's say. I take the opportunity to make an early video with the compilation of some of the most recently asked questions and my answers to my patrons. This video today won't have a bibliography at the end of it as usual, because many of these themes have been spoken here before. So check the bibliography at the end of the videos that shall here be mentioned throughout this video. And if there are any sources that haven't been shown here before, I'll put them on the screen, don't worry. Also, very quickly, some of you know that this year I have created a little experimental solo music project called VAR and some of you have listened to it. And keep on listening, please. And I just want to say that I'm working on the third album other than Human, so you will be able to listen to it very soon on more than 20 streaming music platforms. And more information about this project at the description of this video. Now, I'll try to be brief, quick and straight to the point as much as possible, just like my past loved relationships, because I know the great majority of the audience, at least in this channel, are people in their 30s, the so-called millennials like myself, and we have the attention span of a 2-year-old child engaging with a crowd of silly stuff Muppets. And if you don't grab this type of audience in the next 5 seconds, we are already trying to watch 7 different videos just because the title caught our attention, but we quickly move on to the next because there wasn't enough colorful pictures accompanied by a maniac screaming pointless shite. So here we go, if you please. The other day a couple of patrons of mine came across an Instagram post about Vikings and I read it and I quote one of the phrases. Vikings etched their teeth, which they painted red as a tactic to intimidate their opponents in battle. Not only did the Vikings have war paint, took mushrooms, and went into frenzies before going into battle, but some of them even etched lines in their teeth, which they painted red in order to terrify their enemies. Now, I'm not going to focus on war paint on this video, not today at least, as this is a very common misconception, mostly popularized by Hollywood, by the music industry, usually whitewashing complex indigenous rituals. This doesn't mean that such acts did not exist within certain cultures at certain periods within European history, but it's far more complex than that due to the lack of archaeological evidences, and when it comes to historical records, it's hard to navigate through the biases of contemporary authors. So it's a subject probably for another time. Let's start with the etched or filed teeth, something I've touched on a previous video concerning the cults, rituals and symbols within the movie The Northman. That video itself has a long bibliography at the end of it, so you can check, and please do check that. Well, I have seen and I've heard many people talk about Vikings usually making dental modifications as if it had been something historically common in late Scandinavian Iron Age societies. Some have even pointed out that it was a common ritual for Nordic warriors or people who went on Viking. There are indeed some evidences for this procedure, but quite punctual. For the case of Nordic societies of the late Iron Age and early Middle Ages, So far, 130 human skulls in Norse context have been found with file teeth, nearly all of them from Sweden, either with thin or deep grooves in a horizontal fashion and also very few actually vertical cases. Dental mutilation is something not unheard of all over the world in different cultures and time periods, but it is not common, mind you, not common in Europe. However, it happened in the Scandinavian Viking Age, and it is, to my knowledge, the only medieval European evidences of such dental modifications and mutilation. Of the 130 known cases, only 3 are not from Sweden, 2 being from Denmark and 1 from England, on a mass grave of Scandinavian men that were slaughtered. And all of these cases are men, or war men. Of the remaining 127 cases from Sweden, about 80% have been found in the island of Gotland alone. So it is quite possible that this was a custom solely by the people of Gotland, and the other cases outside Gotland may have been men from that island. So it is not likely, however, that the custom itself originated in Gotland but was picked up from somewhere else outside Europe, probably by Vikings of this area. Vikings in the sense of course, occupation or profession, going abroad on maritime endeavors. Something abnormal was definitely going on in Gotland by this time. Abnormal when compared to everything we know of European history and elite groups and aristocracy. Gotland seems to have been a central place or gathering point of a group who distinguished themselves by these markings on their teeth. More information on this on that previous video, of course. And when I say that something abnormal was going on in Gotland by this period, it's because dental mutilation was not the only type of body modification found in this geographical context and time period. There's the interesting, very interesting case of skull modifications discovered in Viking Age women from Gotland. Again, 3 women from Viking Age Gotland underwent skull elongation. These contexts date back to the latter part of the 11th century, so Scandinavian early Middle Ages, and we have the case of 3 women buried in different locations, and their skulls went through modifications, elongating their heads, their skulls, which marks them as different, and the intention was probably that, to distinguish them from other women, in the sense that these 3 women probably held a distinguished social position. As far as European history goes concerning the practice of elongated skulls, the usual examples are found in southeastern Europe. So it was quite uncommon, and I mean, it was unknown in Scandinavia, especially in this time period when Christianity was already well known within Scandinavia. So much so that these women, these 3 examples, these women themselves have been buried within Christian framework. We are once again, just as the case of file teeth, in the presence of a practice that was brought to Gotland and adopted by people with, possibly, a considerable social status within this society. Now, in terms of mushrooms, of mushroom consumption, well, this is something that was already spoken of in another video, which you can see right here at this information icon in the right upper corner. So just click on that. Of all the fantasies and common misconceptions about Vikings, this one is sadly one of the most common representations about the Viking Age in relation to Berserkir warriors specifically, which then extended further on to all Viking Age warriors. The truth is that there is no evidence to support this idea whatsoever, as I've explained on that previous video. This stereotype originated in 1784, so 18th century, with the theologian Samuel Odeman, a professor at the University of Uppsala, Sweden. Supposedly he met a prisoner of war from Siberia who told him about the native populations of Russia who attained hallucinated state by the use of mushrooms. So according to him, when Russian soldiers ran out of vodka, they used mushrooms and became very violent. Samuel Oerman then had the idea of explaining the berserker rage, berserkerhunger, by the use of mushrooms, but not having any kind of concrete evidences for this. Sorry. Even so, despite all of this, several later scholars used his hypothesis, which became even more popular and widespread after the 1960s, when widespread use of hallucinogens in the West became commonplace. This is proof of how something popular today can influence the history of the past and generate a reality that never existed, but is believed to be true even so. Despite no historical, archaeological, or any kind of documented evidences for this, several tests have also been conducted, the subjects taking several types of drugs, including mushrooms, of course, and the side effects do not allow people to properly stand, let alone engaging in a fight. Another interesting question, and something we see quite depicted in several movies and TV series and even in comic books about the Vikings, is using the skull of an enemy as a drinking vessel, or simply drinking from skulls. And of course there's that idea about the toast made throughout Scandinavia, skull, which is indeed the same word for bowl, and it is also similar to skull, huretskull in Danish, so there might be something here. And indeed, one of the most popular explanations for this, both on websites and in various media networks, social media networks, is that the Vikings drank from the skulls of their dead enemies, transformed them into cups to celebrate their victories. According to my patrons, because I never got to actually finish the series, and I don't remember half of what I've seen, but apparently this image was very popular in the second season of the series Vikings, where the characters Rollo and Borg, I think it's Borg, drink from a human skull, and that's exactly what generated this question. I mean, historically speaking, traces of goblet skulls or bowl skulls have been found in Tibet and prehistoric England, right? But despite dozens of historical and ethnographic reports also mentioning this practice in ancient and medieval Europe, no material evidence has yet been recorded to scientifically prove it in these two periods. We have several examples of Eurasian cultures that supposedly had this practice, such as Scythians, Lombards, Celts, Huns, Lusitanians, among other peoples, which were described as having this custom. But this might come as a disappointment, because in reality, what we have here is a great stereotype, meaning barbarism, bestial behavior, as a patron of mine rightly corrected me, because in Patreon I actually wrote that, and I said bestiality, and that is something else entirely. But the point here, we have specific cultures describing other completely different cultures, often describing their own enemies or people they had disputes or disputes with, or simply didn't like them, and applying this barbarism applied to the figure of the other to denigrate them, to dehumanize them, much like what colonizers have done over centuries to indigenous peoples, calling them savages, to dehumanize them, to make it easier to hurt the other, to create this detachment, and implying someone is not worthy of the respect a human being gives to another. So, generally, those who produced the reports were from another culture or time period, transforming other cultures and people's populations into examples of models opposed to civility, order, and humanity. Reports made by those who often not only had a great geographical separation between the people they reported about, but often a temporal separation, making direct contact with the people of the past about whom the reports were written fucking impossible. Even if the said practice actually existed among some of the people mentioned here before, in the Eurasian context at least, it was circumstantial, but quickly proliferated as a generic stereotype in the chronicles and literature of a large part of the West civilization. In Viking Age Scandinavia, no historical, runic, or archaeological evidence has yet been found, but they exist in Norse mythology, mind you. In Volund's song and Theodoric's saga, the blacksmith Volundur takes revenge on Nilúthur by making cup skulls from his two sons. In Volsunga saga and Skaldskaparmál 42, the skulls of Atli's two sons are made into vessels. But are these mythological examples echoes of some kind of ancient ritual? Well, for some researchers, yes. For instance, Emily Lyle, check right here, she even argues that Mimir's head could have the same meaning, pointing out symbols of sovereignty and giving power to the warrior. But here we have a big problem. Myth is not always a rite or a ritual. Just as there is no evidence that women were married sitting down, for instance, with a hammer on their lap symbolizing the nuptials, as described at the end of the Eddic poem, the Song of Thrymr, we also have no concrete evidence that cup skulls were used in some kind of pre-Christian ritual. If we analyze the narrative context of the examples cited previously, we realize that they all fit into a situation of revenge, a literally deme that perhaps was created in the medieval period after the 11th century, the consolidation of Christianity, reinterpreting the old stereotype of the cup skulls. Now, concerning the toast, the expression skål as a toast was first recorded in the Danish island of Bornholm in 1555. But everything changed in the following century. The famous Danish antiquarian Ole Worm mistakenly translated a passage from Kraukomol 25 into Latin. Instead of describing the twisted tip of bovine skulls, the horns used as containers in the Viking Age, he translated it as the skulls or skulls of those they killed in the court of Otheus. Quickly, the Vikings became skull cup drinkers in the West. And possibly the association between skull, cup, and Viking toast, through the expression skål, spread during the 18th century due to Worm's error. But in reality, these are etymological coincidences, and that's just it. And in an 1863 study in English, this triple association had already been recorded and explained erroneously by George Edwin Roberts, highlighting the spread of this modern fantasy. It's all it is, a modern fantasy. Now, concerning Viking Age ships, the famous Drakkar. Did it really exist? Yeah, well, really quickly, Drakkar is a term used to refer to vessels from the Viking Age, especially those used for military purposes. These ships became famous for featuring figureheads with dragon and serpent heads. In contemporary visual culture, it is very common to see Drakkars in various media platforms. But the question here is that, did they really exist? I mean, the term Drakkar, what's that? And was it really a ship called Drakkar? So the Drakkar emerged in the 19th century France, influenced by Romanticism, in which authors sought a poetic term to refer to Viking ships. The word Drakkar means dragon, and it comes from the Swedish drake, which refers to the term draki used in Old Norse, being a reference to the figurehead of these vessels, not the ship, but to the figurehead. There is an Icelandic account that recommended that dragon-headed figureheads be removed before ships docked on the island, as this scared away the Landvættir, nature spirits. In the attack of Lindisfarne in 793, the Anglo-Saxon account speaks of the sighting of dragons in the middle of a storm, possibly a reference to the Viking ships, right? In turn, King Olaf I of Norway owned a warship called the Long Serpent, Ormenlange. However, in the Viking Age, Ships were called by different terms such as skate, longskip, buringer, hovskip, njur. Each term referred to a distinct type of vessel designated whether it was for commerce, transport, fishing, war, etc. Thus, the word drakar is a contemporary invention to express a stereotype of these vessels. So, for academic purposes, it's better to use longskip instead of drakar. To finalize this video, a very interesting question. Did the Vikings wrote their own history? This question was not in English, why I've translated. Did they write, wrote, have written, wroten? I should have had an English teacher. Anyway, it is very common these days to come across several social media networks, including YouTube channels, they try to clarify or demystify certain points in the history of the Vikings or the overall Nordic populations of the late Iron Age and Middle Ages. I mean, such channels do have sometimes a positive role in the midst of so many stereotypes that popular culture propagates, but even the work of these YouTubers and independent researchers also ends up making some mistakes sometimes. And I'll give you some specific examples of some YouTubers that speak of these same subjects, which I will not mention the names. That's not important. The important thing is to clarify stuff. And I know they watch my videos, so they know who they are. So I take the opportunity to say that there's often the idea that we don't know what the people of medieval Scandinavia called themselves, and this is a very common mistake, but to those people's credit, especially YouTubers, it's hard to actually know the terms if you don't actually read the sources and really do the proper research. And I must say that I, as a former archaeologist for 11 years, I have learned to do research. You are prepared for it, and it is not easy. It's still not easy. But anyway, on the contrary, we do know what the peoples of medieval Scandinavia call themselves. Despite having the same linguistic and cultural base except the Finns and the Sami people, several communities in Scandinavia had an ethnic identity that varied depending on the region, which was preserved by runestones and European sources. For instance, we have the Danes for Denmark, Galthar, South Sweden, Sviar, Southeast Sweden, Vekveriar, Southern Norway, Finnar, Finland, Gutnar, Gotland Island, among many others. I've also already made a video concerning which term to better use when referring to the general populations of Nordic geographical areas of this period, if Nordic, Viking or Old Norse. So do please watch that video for more information on that. We should definitely use the proper terms when we know them, of course, obviously, but when the context encompasses populations of a wide geographical reality, or a temporal reality, or even of a widespread activity, we should also seek for the best terms available to try to avoid reinforcing stereotypes and wrong notions and further give life to misconceptions and historical errors. So, returning to the main question, the idea that the Vikings never wrote their history, have never written, or whatever, it depends on people's notions of history or what they mean by history. If it is a process thought of in a genealogical, theological, and chronicle sense in the medieval Christian way, then no, that's not history. But if it is a registered process from a social point of view, then yes, we have history indeed. There are vast amounts of social, cultural, religious, political and narrative information preserved in the more than 3,000 runestones erected across Scandinavia by Nordic communities. Evidently, this information did not have a historiographical nature or aim by the time, but it is still history. The runestones certainly do not replace the information recorded in later periods or even in the Viking Age by Christianized Europeans, but they do complement along with archaeological sources, the complex historical picture of Northern Europe during the early Middle Ages. So we do know quite a great deal about the Nordic society of the late Iron Age and the Scandinavian early Middle Ages, the so-called Viking Age. By the way, I have another video concerning the term Viking, its origins, how it was used, to whom it was applied. It's not an ethnic group, right? More information on that mentioned video, just click on the information icon in the right over corner of this video, and it will lead you to that video and others here mentioned before. So, this goes in line with what I have heard many YouTubers say, that in truth we know very little about the Vikings. But the truth is that the amount of information about the Nordic populations of the Viking Age obtained by both historians and archaeologists is outstandingly vast. Certainly, there are still many questions and perspectives to be explored by academic researchers, obviously, but simply saying that the Viking Age is little known or mysterious is a huge error. Even if the idea here is specifically mentioning the Vikings as an occupational activity and not indeed the common error of calling Vikings to a people as an ethnic identity, we still have a lot of information and data on that activity itself. So much so that, as a YouTuber myself, if I only talked about the Viking Age alone, I would have subject for every day mind you, for 10 lifetimes. But I mean, it is normal to make mistakes. Mistakes on YouTube and various social media networks happen in all areas at all times, even within the academic world quite a lot actually. I have been an archaeologist, as you know, and those of you who are within academia, you know well how limited it can be and highly frustrating and unjust, and the amount of biases. And it is difficult to fight against this, much more so on online platforms, as misinformation spreads faster than academic knowledge, especially when this same academic knowledge is most of the time not open to the public and only circulates within the same very restricted media. Academic elitization or elitism is one of the major causes for the rapid spread of misinformation and historical fantasies. So, my dear friends, that's it. I do hope this video was useful. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today. Obrigado por hoje. Until we meet again, my dear friends. First time I saw you, you were drinking from a pony keg, and by the end of the night, you were humming, dancing with my leg. You confessed your love to me the night we watched Poltergeist. Now you're telling all your friends that I'm the Antichrist. Hey, you quit fucking with my head. We both know you bound to drive me insane. I don't wanna play the stupid fucking games. I don't wanna play the stupid fucking games. Oh, I don't wanna play these stupid fucking games with you. Do 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 do.